This podcast discusses themes of mental health, which some people may find emotive, such as suicide or other adult-themed content. The information contained in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. All views expressed are solely those of individuals involved and do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever with which we have been, are now, or will be affiliated. The information is not meant to diagnose or treat any mental health condition. If you're experiencing mental health symptoms, we encourage you to contact a mental health service within your community. If you're experiencing a mental health emergency, please seek the relevant support and interventions by presenting to your local accident and emergency department or contacting the relevant emergency services.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Welcome to The Man Hug, the monthly men's mental health podcast. I'm Dean McShane.
I'm Dan Cooper.
I'm Ian Pearce-Hayes.
And I'm Conleth Kelly.
Each month we will discuss a different topic related to men's mental health, which will include a guest speaker who will discuss their own personal story. And each month we will also be showcasing an organisation or charity within the Merseyside area who work within mental health to help build your signposting skills. Hello and welcome to this month's Man Hug. This month we are focusing on the theme of death and dying, a theme that many of us seem to struggle with, and with that we have the two most perfect guests to help us with this episode. A little later on we will be joined by Hannah Todd, who is a celebrant who runs deaf cafes in the Liverpool area, so we'll be finding out what they are and how people can access them for support. Our first guest has many titles, but many of you may have seen his amazing TV series Death With Kris, in which Kris travelled to India, Indonesia, the US and Mexico in search of different and better ways of dealing with death. Kris has also spent 35 years working as a pathological technician in some of Britain's leading mortuaries. So Kris, welcome to the Man Hug.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here.
Oh, lovely. We're all sharing a bit of cake, which Ian's made as well, which is nice. Puts us in the Deaf Cafe mood as well. So before we go diving into your TV series, which we are really, looking forward to do, you've got many titles and roles. So just
where do you want to start?
I suppose what's your Wikipedia? What's your, in a nutshell? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh my word! So, like you said, I worked for. Well, now His Majesty's Coroner Service, because it was Her Majesty's Coroner Service when I was there. So I worked for Her Majesty's Coroner Service for 33 years, something like that. And even when I was a young child, I always had a fascination with that aspect of life, the end of it. And the little Welsh village that I grew up in, Llanberis, it had a quarry hospital up on the mountain for the huge slate quarry. And it had a little mortuary in the garden of the hospital. And all the kids were scared to go there. But I was always fascinated by this tiny little building in the garden of this hospital with these two slate slabs in it. And I'd spent time in there by myself. So I think I was always destined to be just a little odd. No. And but I had this compulsion and feeling that I wanted to work with the dead. So that's what I went on to do. But in addition to that, I am also a stand-up comedian and one of Wales's largest drag queens, a character called Maggie Noggy, who's done a bunch of her own television series. But I'm also a druid, and a kind of a double whammy druid as well. I'm the chief of the Anglesey Druid Order, but I'm also a druid of the Gorsedd Bards of the island of Britain, who are the Eisteddfod druids for the national cultural celebration of Wales and everything Welsh. Yeah. And what else do I do? I'm an author as well and a television presenter. Yeah.
Wow, it's a lot of hats to wear, isn't it, really?
I'm not entirely sure who I am unless I look in the mirror in the morning. If there's eyelashes the size of a cow, then that kind of gives it away where I'm going that day.
So just because I don't think we've touched on druids before in the Man Hug, so just tell us a little bit about what you do for the druids then.
So Druidry, bizarrely, Druidry is recognised as an official religion in the British Isles by the Home Office. And whilst that does polarise some people who don't necessarily perceive it as a religion, but see it as a form of spirituality, but essentially it's the indigenous pre-Christian spiritual belief of the British Isles, Ireland, and the Isle of Man, but also it reaches out over continental Europe as well. So places like Brittany, predominantly the Celtic-speaking nations. And it's a spirituality that is defined by a Celtic worldview. So usually it has mythology that is at the heart of it. So Ireland and Wales share a very similar mythological language, which kind of, even though our language is very different, we share a commonality of myth. And you see that running through Celtic traditions and Celtic cultures. So essentially it's an animistic, polytheistic, spiritual worldview that's seen through the lens of Celtic culture.
Oh. So with that religion, does that shape your views for death and dying as well? As there certain cultures and,
do you know, I think it's a two-way thing. I think not only did my work with the dead inform my Druidry, but my Druidry also informed the way in which I worked with the dead.
Yeah.
And particularly in the way that I worked with the bereaved as well. And so I don't think the line between them is very clear-cut. There's an interweaving, like very elaborate Celtic knotwork. They kind of weave into one another. And so I think that when I do get round to writing my autobiography, which my publishers want me to wait until I'm 55.
Long later.
Well, 2 years. So, I think the title of it will be Death, Drag and Druidry.
Beautiful.
The Quandary of Quiddity, because it really is a quandary of quiddity. That triangle is rather peculiar. So they've all of those things have informed the triangle of, I guess, of who I am. Death, drag, and Druidry. Drag is essentially just the way in which I dealt with it all. It's find that humour is a coping mechanism, and even though I was on one side of the fence in a clinical capacity, we also had to deal with our emotions whilst dealing with horror, tragedy, sadness, bereavement. So it's important that you have some kind of a pressure valve. And I found very quickly that comedy was the way that I did that to, I guess, transform my anxiety into joy. But I use that same methodology for my Druidry as well. That is something that transforms my anxiety into joy.
Yeah, that's brilliant. For your role and being around death so much, did you just find that to be normal in the end? And it's your everyday, isn't it? And it's your work. Or did you still need to, kind of process it and talk through what you were seeing on a daily basis with people?
I think it was an ongoing. I don't think it's something that you ever get used to, but rather it's something that you learn how to deal with. Yeah. And to be in touch with your emotional spectrum, I think, is vitally important. The awe of the work never left. And I still feel to this day, even though now I feel that I'm more death adjacent, even though it seems as if that story is going to change again. I might talk about that a bit later on. And so finding ways to deal with the situations that we found ourselves in, and then having the empathy and compassion to deal with the public, it was important that you were able to evaluate your own emotional well-being and being honest with that aspect of yourself. So in the last mortuary that I worked with, we had a particular cupboard, one of the cleanest cupboards, I think. So if somebody needed some time out, we would use that as an euphemism, oh, where's Kristoffer? He's in the cupboard. And it's probably just because I needed to have a cry.
Yeah.
And whilst we weren't taking ourselves away from everybody else, it was a very safe, nurturing space. And all of the mortuaries I've worked at have been very safe and very nurturing. That if somebody is having a moment, and it might not be one thing, it might be a culmination of a number of scenarios that comes to a crescendo, then we were all there for each other. No words needed to be spoken, just the space in which to cry, And so I've always been in awe of how it's made me feel and how it's made me become the emotional kind of person that I am.
I think we can relate to that as being nurses, you know, when we're around sort of death quite a lot as well. But it's nice to see that you've got that support network within that occupation as well. It's something I didn't really consider, you know, but it's clearly very important to be able to process it. And
I definitely, yeah. I think there's an anthropological term that's visceral insulation and visceral insulators, and all of us in the room are visceral insulators to one extent or another, where we protect, defend other people against that which is visceral. And I think there's a certain comradeship that arises within those circles of people who are visceral insulators that only they can understand because they're experiencing it together, and that those can become very nurturing environments for people, encouraging people to reach into their emotions and deal with them in a way that is appropriate for them.
Yeah, that's really true, yeah. Now, we've got Claire in the room, one of our colleagues, who told us all about you and said, you have to watch this TV series. So we went and did our homework and we did watch it and we all fell in love with it. We thought it's absolutely fantastic. And that's one of the reasons why we reached out and said, yeah, we've got to get you on, especially for this subject. Now, in your TV series, we'll talk about it in a minute, but what I kind of wanted to know first was, what was it that made you want to go on that journey in the first place?
I think for the duration of my career, not only was I immersed in the death service industry, but I was also painfully and chronically aware of how bad we are at dealing with death. Not just in the British Isles, but in predominantly Western countries. There's not necessarily a denial of death, because we are still voyeuristically attracted towards death. We love watching violent movies. We like killing things on computer games. There's still this desire and need to be confronted with death. But when it comes to our own personal deaths, we're pretty dreadful at dealing with it. And when I left, but also towards the end of my career, I was coming across more and more people who wanted to become more empowered when it comes to death, because we do live in a consumeristic, industrialized version of the death industry, and sometimes profit becomes that which is the most important within that industry. And to an extent, I guess, because there's nearly 8 billion of us on the planet, so 175,000 people die every single day, which is several thousands of people every 60 seconds are dying. So in the 21st century and through the 20th century, the body became a problem to be solved, not something to be honoured as an intrinsic element of the cycles of life. So what happens, of course, is you end up in a conveyor belt system of consumerism and industrialization. And that doesn't necessarily give people the space that they need to assimilate grief, emotionally relocate that individual who's died. And I became more and more aware of people who wanted to take that power back by creating their own bespoke funeral services, burying somebody on their own land, having alternative funerals, not for the sake of being quirky, but because they saw it as something that honors that person's life, rather than having, the cookie cutter. I mean, you've probably all been to crematoria. While some of them are beautiful spaces, it's still quite discombobulating when you come out and you see the next hearse going in, and you're like, oh my God, where's my mum gone then? What's happened behind the scenes? And we saw more and more people wanting to take power into their own hands, more celebrants coming to the fore, creating bespoke services. So when I left, I was interested in having a little look at, well, what do other people do? How do other cultures immerse themselves in the end of life? Because I'm so familiar with the way that we do it, and why we do it, and I'm acutely aware of why the contemporary funeral model is what it is and why we do death in the way that we do. And maybe there's something that we could learn from other cultures.
I love that. It's it's your mission to go and find the best practice, isn't it? Well, let's see what other people are doing. Let's see what we can mostly learn. I read a quote that you'd said, we turn the experience of dying into a clinical experience rather than a soulful, spiritual one, which, it's so relatable, isn't it? And death has been transferred over to the professionals, as you were saying there, and monetised as well. Do you think that's why people still find it scary and taboo, and they don't want to talk about it?
I think so. Prior to the 1860s, prior to Queen Victoria and the industrialisation of death was very much a familial practice. And the medicalisation of our society hadn't quite taken hold by that point either. It was very much in its nascent stages. So death was something that was at the very heart of the family. Everybody knew, the old lady who lived at the top of the village or just on the outskirts, who would be the midwife, who would come and lay out the body, who knew the best poultices for shingles and styes. We all had these people in our communities all the way up until the 70s. I remember Mrs. Green, her name was, in Llanberis. And if somebody died, that was the first thing the family member would say, get Mrs. Green down, she'll know what to do, But then we had not only the industrialisation of death, but also the medicalisation of death happened at the same time. And having been in the medical profession for so long, it was apparent as well that, especially through the latter half of the 20th century, that the medical profession in itself was alarmingly not prepared for the existential factors that come in towards the end of life. And thank the gods, we've changed that in recent decades, with palliative and end-of-life care, with hospice care. These amazing things have started to come in, where as early parts of our health system were alarmingly unprepared for. Because ultimately death can't be separated from the big questions in life. And the biggest question we all have is, what happens to us when we die? And it was always in the care of priests or the priesthood or spiritual elders and leaders of our society for time immemorial. And the way in which we've become accustomed to death and its medicalisation, not to say that not to suggest there's anything wrong with that, because we can now live in a time where we can die without pain. And our ancestors didn't know that. They knew pain. And at least we have that in modernity. But there's also a hidden element to it. Nobody really knew where we were in the ranks of hospital care. And we would sometimes see, mortuaries are usually slathered in cameras, right? Security cameras all over them. And you would often see somebody walking past the building or the department and suddenly notice that they're outside the mortuary, and their entire behaviour would change. You would see completely normal, sensible businessmen with briefcases absolutely lose the contents of their bowels and trying to look through the cracks in the door, because it's liminality, right? It's other. There's something else behind those doors, and it's secretive. But we've made it a secret. We've removed the dead from the ranks of the living in case we offend the sensibilities of the living, therefore remove the dead. And then other cultures have gone to even greater depths, especially the United States of America, where you are embalmed within an inch of next Tuesday, and you will look asleep and cosmetically prepared for whatever afterlife you will spend in your casket. And yet Granny is dead. She's quite dead. And there's a certain, as somebody who's worked with the dead for so long, there is still a certain beauty in the corpse, because it sends a very powerful psychological message that I am dead. I am no longer here. And those messages are really important. So I think it is scary for people. It's fearful because we have gone to huge efforts over the last 150 years to make death other, to separate it completely, And even when it comes to the amount of time that we're afforded to grief, to grieve the hierarchy of grief as well. Children are at the top, and right down at the very, very bottom will be pets. But we probably all know people whose children are their pets. And to lose a little pussycat is the most devastating thing that could happen. But we prioritise where we put these people on this hierarchical triangle of grief. And that reinforces the fear that we feel around something that feels so extraordinary because we experience it so very few times in our lives.
Because it just, sorry for jumping in there here, Dane, whatever. But, you look at the UK, it's very multicultural, thankfully, all these different cultures, so all these different experiences, and, how that is taken away from you. No, it's one model fits all, that kind of thing. Because I know myself coming from Ireland, I remember being district nurse and patients of mine passed away, and go, Conleth, will you make it to the funeral? It's like, yeah, I'll try. I'm really busy and things like this, whatever. Said, when is it? And said, it's 4 weeks' time. I go, what? To me, it's 2 days, that kind of thing. Because I know, and one scene, because I'm big into public health and palliative care, because we're all going to die. It's not just sorting it out for you, it's for the other people you leave behind. So it really, really helps with that. And it's the housekeeping side. It's finances, insurance, and things like that. But the scene when I actually show in it, I don't know if you ever watch it, in Derry Girls, whenever the aunt dies and she's at the wake, she's in the coffin, the girls are all there, but the wee English boys there, and going, does anybody see the dead body? Is it just me? And they're all touching, goes, it's just Aunt Mary, doing it. And so I remember one time I showed to a group of, it was district nurse students in particular, and one of them was Irish, going, yeah, that's just it, and so what I'm trying to say though is that this one model fits all for such a culture, a society we actually have. It's just the trauma that causes for them as well. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's such a good point, and it's something I'm so glad we touched on, because I found that myself. If prolonging the service seems to add to the trauma, and Irish family myself, and you say within 2 or 3 days everything's done and it's over, and you're able to get on with the next process of bereavement, but having this 4, 5, 6 week window,
that's very common now as well, because we've bureaucratized death as well in the West. There's so much red tape. There's even more now because of the introduction of the medical examiner system in the UK since 2019, which has caused even more inevitable delays as it's finding its feet under the table. And we lost a member of the order, didn't we, just before Christmas, on Boxing Day actually, and her funeral was on the 3rd of February.
Oh, jeez.
Wow. My word.
You think of that episode we did in Indonesia, where it was they died and they had to be buried before the nightfall, wasn't it?
Yes, he had died at 2:57. It's very precise in the morning. And the entire thing had concluded by 10:30 that morning. It was all done. But in stark contrast, the other people in the Tanah Toraja region of Sulawesi Island, who are the indigenous animistic polytheists of that region, those two gentlemen, a father and son, they had been it's a bit of a quandary. To them, they're not perceived as dead. They're perceived as people who are sick, people who are sleeping. And they had been in that state for 3 years before the funeral.
But the emotions the wife went through whenever it was this is it now. And all the family, they all were crying and grieving, and even though they'd been lying there for that period of time, I thought it was powerful. It was
a huge surprise, but it was immensely powerful because it wasn't necessarily about the individual expression or experience of grief, but a communal experience of grief. There were over 1,000 people in that Rampu Solo, they call it the Festival of Smoke Ascending, so the spirit leaving to the other world. But what we had to take out of the program, unfortunately due to editing constraints, the men would all gather at sunset dressed in their traditional clothing and formed a circle of 400 men, and the women were in the middle with buckets of cigarettes and palm wine. And the men were linked arm by arm, and they chanted and danced until sunrise and grieved. And to see 400 grown men embracing one another, crying, wailing, and the women feeding them cigarettes because they couldn't let go, and palm wine was remarkable and deeply touching. But what I found was fascinating, particularly about Indonesia, was to the Tanah Torajan people, the emotions that we feel. I was like, oh my gosh, this was such a profound message. Every emotion that we feel is not local. They don't believe that anything you feel is localized, that your emotions are also territorial and geographical, and that everything around you impacts on your emotions. So if you wake up feeling melancholy one morning, it might not just be because of something you've experienced, but it could be just because that acorn on the tree outside has fallen off the tree and doesn't know where it's going, and you've picked up on it. And are in unison with it. So they never perceive themselves to be hyper-individuated, but rather part of a territory and a geography of community of which only a small amount or percentage is human. And that was like bonkers, but deeply profound.
Amazing. From all of these amazing experiences you got from travelling to these places, was there sort of any key sort of learning where you thought, yeah, they've got it right, they're doing something right there, you know, in terms of the death and dying process?
I think it probably was Indonesia, because we went to India and I worked in West London for 9 years, so I was very accustomed to working with a Hindu or a Sikh community. And I knew of their practices. I mean, it's a completely other thing to see nearly 300 people being burnt in the open air. Nothing can prepare you for that. For the sensual aspect of it, the scent, the heat, the immense heat, the sound. It was incredibly profound. But it wasn't a huge surprise, because I kind of knew what they did. It was just the visuals were something else. But it was Indonesia that completely blew my mind, because of the way in which they perceive that death isn't something that just happens in a second, but rather something that happens gradually as various aspects of the individual are disconnected from the human community. So hence why it can take several years for this ritual to conclude. But it felt that everybody was held in a commonality of grief, and we don't see that in the West. We see that grief is a hindrance to productivity, it's a hindrance to efficiency. You need to get back to work. You can't have 3 days compassionate leave just because your auntie has died, but we might give you that if it's your parent who's died. So we have a completely skewed way of, I think, of looking at what it means to be in a communal experience of grief. And I guess that's very easy for us, because we live in a consumerist capitalist society, so it's just part and parcel of what we do. But I think there are things that we can do to moderate that. So even though Indonesia was the most surprising on an emotional level, bizarrely, and I didn't foresee it at all, it was the United States of America that surprised me the most, with this potential for a reset of the contemporary Western funeral model. And I didn't expect that to come from the United States of America.
Was that the composting episode?
So yeah. So that's the scientific term for it is natural organic reduction. Hello. So the scientific name for it is natural organic reduction, and it's funereal. Is that the right term, perhaps? Funereal term is terramation.
Right.
So cremation is to become flame. Terramation means to become earth. And it's a process of reducing human remains down to its consistent elements within 30 days. And then after 30 days, the skeletal remains are removed and crushed and added back into the mulch at that point. And then 30 days later, it's prime, rich compost. And what struck me with that was they placed me inside one of the terramation vessels and sealed me in it, which was a momentarily slight panic to begin with. And they played my own mock funeral in the service area. And I could hear this muffled sound of myself on these screens, and people. It was very, very peculiar. But suddenly I had this sense of I wasn't being disposed of. I was on a journey to becoming something. Whereas, to be cold and frank about it, a crematorium is a bio-incinerator. It's there to dispose of something that is no longer of use to society or the planet. Whereas terramation was a completely different viewpoint. It was, well, no, actually, you can become a gift for the very thing that sustained you and fed you and nurtured you and watered you all your life. So why not at the very end of your life, instead of going, do you know what, love, I'm going to use all your gas, but rather turn around and say, here's 250 pounds of prime compost. Knock yourself out, get yourself some trees and parsnips.
There's a really weirdly beautiful moment where you're eating the salad of someone that was composted, and with the family, and I thought, wow, it's just a beautiful way in that whole cycle of life again. But being part of the earth again and the soil, it was something really.
I thought it was also good. In one episode, you had the big pink metal coffin. You were like, oh yes, yeah, and then the episode you were like, oh no. You went from something completely bad for the earth to this.
It was a casket that would never rot, wouldn't it?
It would never rot.
It was a casket would never. It would be there for all time, isn't it?
$10,000. For something that will never rot. And that dichotomy was really interesting, right? To see the exuberance of Hollywood, this quest for eternal life and eternal beauty, whether it's through the embalmed body, the gorgeous pink casket, or the $15 million mausoleum made out of granite and marble that gives this illusion of eternity. And yet, simultaneously, we go up to Seattle and we visit this company who composts people. And that is eternal. But it's eternal life in a very different format. And it struck me as something that could offer a reset. But like you mentioned, the lady that we went and saw whose son died of dreadful, tragic circumstances, and he was very young, 46, a police officer in Southern California, and they had always lived in this part of northern Washington that they had a lot of land, beautiful trees, they grew everything. So it made sense for his mother to want her son nearby, but not as a memorial, but rather as life. And we ate food that he grew, and it was like, when you just have one of those moments of, wow, this has completely blown my world. I thought I knew all of it. And we do, don't we? We become complacent in our professions, in our careers, and you can become a little bit cocky and think, oh, I know it all. And then suddenly something comes along and slaps you across the face and kind of says, actually, there's something amazing out there. But that lady that we met and the other people that we met at these various human composting facilities, what struck me was the process takes 60 days, right? 60 days before you become compost. And during that 60 days, any member of that family can just come and sit with the vessel. So you have 60 days to sit with your grief, and they have death cafes there, and they're just always available for someone to just be there. They don't have to speak to them or anything. They're just sitting there as their loved one is being transformed in a living process. And I thought, we're obsessed with life after death, and life after death has always been something that has consumed the way that we emotionally connect with death. But this was life after life, which is a completely different ball game. So it absolutely blew my mind. So I'm determined now that So in a bizarre twist of fate, in 1883, it was a Welsh Druid, and most people don't realise that it was a Welsh Druid who was responsible for the legalisation of cremation in the British Isles. His name was Dr. William Price. He was a physician. He was the first person to start a socialist healthcare system. And Erin Bevan worked in his socialist healthcare society, much after William Price's death. And it was a Druid who changed the face of death in the UK forever. And I'm determined that he's going to be a Welsh Druid in the 21st century who's going to be, instrumental in making terramation legal. So I'm on the campaign.
And you won't be able to see Kristoffer's t-shirt at the moment, but
yeah,
it will be on our Instagram later. It does say "compost me," which is beautiful. So
Isn't it lovely?
Yeah.
But this company as well over in America, they have another slogan which I just think is fabulous. On the back of the t-shirt it says, "I'm going to soil myself."
There you go. There's the selling pointers. There's the slogan. So I suppose that just the final thing to sort of touch on. There's a really beautiful moment where you go to your local cemetery where your family are, and you say hello to Dad, but you touch on even the taboo of death within your own family, and I suppose the big question is what do we need to do in terms of changing this kind of taboo and the way that we think about it in the UK?
I think the most important thing is that we open channels of dialogue before the inevitable happens. Because I've seen so many instances, countless instances over the decades of the inevitable discussion happens when the inevitable happens. And by then it's too late for so many people who don't have the emotional capability to deal with it at that particular moment. And I find that when people have opportunities to open channels of dialogue beforehand, however uncomfortable they might be, they're incredibly useful for when the end actually happens. So it's like, for instance, my own father's death, which is bizarre because I'm the same age as he was when he died, and that's odd, isn't it, when you're outliving your parents and bypassing them somehow. But I sat with him in the cancer unit, and I just asked him, I said, how are you feeling? You're never leaving this ward. How are you feeling? And his reaction to me was, "Oh my God, thank God somebody's actually said it." Nobody had had the, I don't know, maybe they felt that it was audacious, confrontational, impolite, or not the right thing to do. But I needed to know what my dad felt. I wanted to know what he felt so that I could feel it, so that I could be with him in that space. And my father and I didn't have an emotional relationship with one another. But in that moment we did, where he was honest about the fact that he was afraid, and that he looked to his son in that moment for comfort, knowing what I did for a living. He also suspected that I might have known some secrets, and I just had a conversation with him about, it's okay, it'll be okay. We will carry on, and I value that moment now. But at the same time, I wish that my other family members could have had equally as beautiful a moment. However difficult, it was difficult. There wasn't a single part of it that was easy, but I felt that it was necessary. And we try within, our Druid order, we have events that happen, and I think every 31st of October, the whole of the Western world goes crazy for this seemingly American-influenced feast of Halloween. And yet it's a Celtic festival for the dead. We have our own feast of the dead. Calan Gaeaf, we call it in Welsh. Samhain over in Ireland. Halloween in the popular world. And we try and encourage people during that time to face those difficult questions in their lives, to open channels of dialogue, because then it feels as if we're doing something for our own community, to face the uncomfortability of the inevitable in a way that is safe. And I just wish that we were all brave enough to be able to just talk about it. And you mentioned earlier on that somebody's coming today who runs a death cafe. Those are amazing things.
Yeah.
They're amazing things. The face of death is changing. And it's changing because there are more and more people who are standing up and saying it's important that we have these discussions, and try and assimilate them into a lived experience.
I think that's so true, isn't it? I think the more people that do talk about it and normalise it, then it's going to work out better for society, and it's going to reduce the stigma and taboo of it as well. But thank you for being such an amazing guest. Honestly, we've learned so much, and it's
beautiful.
Has the time gone already? Oh, see, that's the thing. Put a microphone in front of me and I don't shut up.
Just Maggie's not here. I've heard about Maggie.
Oh, she would still be at it. You wouldn't have had a word in edgeways.
But once again, thank you so much, and I massively recommend your series to everyone. So do go and see if you can catch it on S4C or BBC iPlayer.
Just quickly, Claire, you said how long is it going to be on BBC iPlayer for? Is it going to be cut off soon or?
It'll be there for a while.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. It's still going to be there for a while.
That's brilliant.
It's called Marw Kris in Welsh,
that's the
so
one.
you'd have to look at that one.
There you go. So Claire's Welsh is better than mine. So yeah. But once again, thank you so much for joining us. You've been the perfect guest for this topic, and good luck with everything you do. And hopefully we'll keep in touch as well. So thank you, Kris.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
So we are a host down this month. Our Dan has taken a much needed break, so we hope you and your lovely family enjoy the Big Apple, Dan. So, deaf and dying, boys, I suppose we will come at this from different angles with being nurses from different clinical backgrounds, but I wanted to highlight a phobia, which I've seen quite a few times, called death anxiety or thanatophobia. And it's an intense fear that can significantly impact a person's daily life. People with thanatophobia might be afraid of their own death or the death of loved ones. Some of the common symptoms include excessive worry, as you'd imagine, or fear about death or dying. Often there is avoidance of situations involving death and dying, and there's often an intense anxiety when thinking about death. There are loads of factors that can contribute to thanatophobia. Low levels of serotonin and dopamine can contribute to anxiety and depression, which can exacerbate these fears related to death and dying. Some other factors such as poor health or serious illness, and other mental health disorders such as depression or anxiety as well. Along with witnessing illness, witnessing trauma or experiencing violence can all add to these factors. Thanatophobia can be treated in the same way that many phobias or anxiety disorders can, through various methods, and the most common is psychotherapy. So cognitive behavioural therapy, which we've spoke about before on the podcast, CBT, is often the most effective for this. And that's where we get to explore our thoughts, our feelings and our behaviours. Medication may also be prescribed, and support groups as well, so sharing experiences with others can provide comfort and understanding. Research suggests that as much as 1 in 7 of us have anxiety regarding death, so it's extremely common. So do reach out for support if this is something you feel you would benefit from. Conleth,
you all right? So yeah, with regards to this, I've got no real facts and figures. I've got a couple of things regarding, because you're probably going to go, oh, here's Conleth again talking about public health and palliative care, and it is a big issue. It's a big thing, a big bugbear of mine. Just to try and spread the message to help not just yourself, to maybe set yourself out thinking, was it I'm trying to think of the name of the philosopher who I planted the cabbages, sowing the seeds, my cabbages are growing, that's it, and whatever happens after it just is what it is. There's not much you can really do about it, and it's that kind of attitude. Well, if you ever ploughed a field, it gives you plenty of time to actually philosophise, okay? Now, the other thing as well with regards to this is public health and palliative care, because, it is trying to look at those things. So it can be just even doing the housekeeping things, like I said, maybe whenever we're talking in earlier podcasts around where's the insurance forms, what about the house details, even last will and testaments, things like that, getting wills done, because really wills cost money. as well. Like I remember in Woolworths, you used to be able to buy a will at the stationery counter for like it was £10 or £5 or something like that, and fill that in. But now obviously it's a legal process that goes with it. So it's looking into those things. So inheritance tax isn't done. Government don't get hold of that. But it's also other things like what your wishes are, because family may think, well, what do they want? And it can cause angst, anxiety, things like that. So it's having these discussions just about and not leaving it too late, talking about it whenever you're fitting well and doing all those things. But public health and palliative care came to me. I remember one time going to a conference, and it must have been about, I don't know, maybe 18 years ago, and it was this thing, public health and palliative care. I was going, what is that all about? What am I going to get better through things like this? And I went to it, and it was a fellow from Australia, Professor Alan. I do apologise for pronouncing the name wrong. Alan Kelly. He's a professor in health and social care at Northumbria University. And whenever he delivered what he was talking to, there was only a handful of us there. It just opened my mind. I thought, yes, these are the things we actually need to actually get through there. Because some of the questions that people may actually say, oh, over in Ireland, they've got it right. Where they have the wake and then the funeral and things like this, we go around. And yeah, it is different things for different people. It is a sad occasion, it can be, but it's celebration of life. And yeah, I understand it can be a sudden death, it could be a child, things like that. It is a different story for different things. And culturally, it is a good thing. But I still say we have not got it right over Ireland, because that's the afterwards. It's the beforehand where it's like, no, this isn't happening and things like this, whatever. We need to actually have these discussions, get it out, and talk around these things to actually help. And it's the people who you're leaving behind. It's to actually help them as well. And that's the thing, that it's about loved ones. But Alan Keeler, he's actually written a book in 2022, textbook of public health care within palliative care. Definitely worth I'll look at whatever, check out his work. But yeah, I'm all for it. Okay, Ian.
What a profound day I think we've had listening to Kristoffer earlier. It's just, quite, I just think very profound. And obviously what Conleth was saying about the philosopher and the side of it is interesting as well. I guess what that brings me back to is that, the one thing that we're certain of is that we will die. And I think that's what came from me from what Kristoffer earlier was speaking about. But also death is part of life. And I guess it's that, both of those things are true, aren't they? Death and life, it's that reciprocity is absolutely key. I think what's interesting in terms of healthcare, and as a nurse, in terms of my clinical practice, I can remember so I looked after people that came in with chest pain, with heart attacks, and I can remember it was a brilliant job. I absolutely loved the job that I actually had, and the technological changes that I saw in the 12 years that I did that were quite astonishing. If you had a heart attack in the late 80s, you would be in hospital for around 6 weeks. You'd be on bed rest, and on your bedside cabinet, you would have an ashtray on the top. And because you were laid up for 6 weeks, if you survived a heart attack, then you would, if you didn't smoke, you'd probably take it up, to be honest, because you're in bed bored for 6 weeks. That was the reality. Even when I was practicing as we used to smoke in the kitchens of hospitals. Astonishing, I think, when you look at that now. If you have a heart attack today, you're likely to be in hospital. If you're, with prompt treatment, I understand that there's lots of pressures in terms of accessing that, but if it all runs smoothly, you could be in and out within 24 hours from a heart attack. So in my working life, not even my lifetime, my working life, I've seen that change from 6 weeks, if you survived, to incredible survival rates to be in and out within 24 hours, which I just think is mind-blowing and astonishing. And I guess all of those technological changes, the diagnostic investigations, the drug therapies, all the different interventions are just, hard to sort of take on board all those changes that take place. And I think it's easy. One of the things that Kristoffer said was that they ended when he was talking to us was that it's almost like we want to live forever in a sense. And I guess that gives us can give rise to this, I guess, those expectations that we will, our life will always be held up. We can potentially live forever, whereas actually we can forget about death, or we can be then frightened to death, as Dean has just said. And I just think that's quite, in terms of the changes that have taken place, it's quite astonishing. So getting on the train this morning, coming into work, the front page of the Guardian says, obesity blamed as rising life expectancy stalls. And what it's saying is that within the last number of years, life expectancy, so for men, that's you can expect to live to 78.6 years. If you're a woman, 82.6 years. So 78, 82 years, a good innings in anyone's book. But they're actually saying it's stalling, that in England, it suffers the largest decline in life expectancy, with fall in average annual improvement to about 0.18 years. So it's stalling. So although it's improved, so you think from 1900, if you're born in 1900, the life expectancy for a man was about 44, for a woman was 48. In 1950, that went up to about 66 years of age for men, 70 for women. So you can see, although it's increased, it's actually at a period now when it's stalling. What the Guardian is saying that follows a report that the slowdown, experts are actually blaming for three things: poor diet, mass inactivity, and obesity, and they're the big challenges that we actually face. Amongst that, the World Health Organization are actually saying that if no measures are taken promptly, then the increase in antimicrobial resistance, the deaths will be greater than those of cancer. So we're facing a whole, as life expectancy has improved, it's stalling because of the way we're living, really, in a sense. And what they're also saying is if there's no global approach, then, in terms of the developments, in terms of the increase in vaccines, and reducing our use of antibiotic use or appropriate use of antibiotics, unless there's a global approach, then that continuation in terms of that stalling and possibly even decline will actually taking place. And this is happening, isn't it, at the same time? What's the new president of America declared? Oh, yeah, we're going to come out of the World Health Organization. So the funding in terms of the research is then, you can see, unless we have a global approach, unless we change the way we live in terms of looking at how we live and live well, you can see how that will have an effect. And I think that's just really important in terms of addressing those the changes that we're capable of, but understanding about how we live, how we share those massive changes through the likes of better hygiene, vaccinations, then that's about actually living well as well. So I think that's a real challenge for us as part of those the huge changes that are taking place technologically.
See, I told you we'd come at it from different angles. Amazing. That's so interesting. Thanks, chap. So next up, we're going to be joined by Hannah Todd, who is going to tell us all about deaf cafes.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Okay, it's this part of the Man Hug now when we focus on local initiatives and support related to our theme. And we're joined by Hannah Todd, who is a celebrant, and Hannah runs deaf cafes. So deaf cafes have become a global movement. They provide a unique space for people to talk about death, which is often considered a taboo subject, as we spoke with Kris before all about. So Hannah, welcome to the Man Hug.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Amazing. So you are our second celebrant that we've had. We were joined by Nasha from Frankie Goes to Hollywood quite a few months back.
It makes me laugh because I know him through his daughter.
Yeah.
So yeah, his daughter, who I weirdly texted earlier today. Just, but yeah, only ever bumped into him once professionally.
Yeah.
But yeah, the rest of the time it's in the pub.
It was really nice because he spoke about, he gave us some really lovely stories, and especially about the things that he has to read out, and it was really endearing. And he spoke as well about his time as being a celebrant during COVID as well, and the difficulties and things. So it was a really fascinating podcast that we did. So yeah, just tell us a little about your role with this then. So what, for people that don't know too much about the role of a celebrant, what do we do?
I am the person that will come into your home, should the time arise, and I will find out all about what made your great aunt, your mum, your dad, whoever it is, special, basically, so that I can then tell everybody else at the service. So it's great. I am very blessed because I get to hear the absolute best of people. You hear the best stories, and once everyone's loosened up, you hear the stories you're not allowed to tell. So I always want to go to the wake afterwards and find out the rest of those stories, but I don't often get to.
Yeah, I think that's what Brian told us when he was on as well. The same thing. You feel privileged to be part of it, really, and the story,
and getting those stories. And I had a lady who, bless, she was married to her husband for 52 years. And everyone was talking about how Dad was a pain in the arse. He was this, but he was generous, he was kind, he was funny, he loved Liverpool. And I was like, and what about you? And she went, he was okay. 52 years of marriage, and he was okay.
Fantastic. So we wanted to touch on death cafes because to many people who are listening, they won't have a clue what this is. And I think through our roles of nursing, we've always looking for better initiatives and things that we should be using to get people talking and to initiate conversation. So this literally does that, doesn't it? It's
Death Cafe is. I describe it as peer-led because that sounds a little bit better than we don't know what we're doing. But it's not that we don't know what we're doing. We just don't know where that conversation is going to take us on that particular day. So it's driven by the people that turn up. So if somebody wants to talk about the mechanics of death, when we die, what happens afterwards, that's the way a conversation will go. And a lot of the time, it will be more about bereavement and grief. Most people come from either their working background is something to do with death and dying, or they've suffered a bereavement in the last year or so.
Do you find that more people tap into it if they've suddenly been bereaved, or is it better for people as maybe have loved ones on palliative care, for example, and they know
it's suitable for anyone. So like I said, the conversation is led by whatever people want it to be led by. So we go with the flow of that conversation. I think it's important because anticipatory grief is huge. It's massive. Like when you know someone's going to die but they're not dead yet, you've got such a wealth of conflicting emotions and often nowhere to express that because the person that's dying might not want to talk about it, or they might really want to talk about it and families don't. So that's another side of it. We get people who are with terminal diagnosis and their family don't want to have the conversation.
That's really
but they need to.
Yeah, we spoke with Chris before about this with his dad, that he was the only person who felt able to have that conversation with his dad knowing he was dying, whereas because he'd been a mortician for 30 years, whereas the rest of the family just didn't want to talk about it and it was so taboo. Do you think it gives people the skills to be able to talk about it?
Yeah, I think it helps that the more people talk about it, the easier it gets. So once you've got over that hurdle of actually starting the conversation, it gets easier. And a lot of conversations happen straight after a funeral as well, because you've just been to one. You'll have the, oh, I don't want that. Oh, don't let them release birds at my funeral, or oh, that was such a waste of flowers. Like, people have obviously got such strong opinion on flowers. So I think when you've been to one, it can open up those conversations, but then obviously you don't want to have to wait for a funeral. So death cafes, there is generally one a month in Liverpool, and it's an opportunity for you to come, and you can come regularly, semi-regularly, or just as one-off. But I think it does help to just start the conversation. And for also people to say, I'm sorry, you went where? And then you get to start that conversation. If you say you're going to a death cafe, people will be like, oh, why? Why are you doing that? So, because...
And I suppose that's it, isn't it? Maybe just the word death cafe might seem quite morbid to some people, really, but it's...
It can. So I refer to them on Death Cafe. On their website, it's just Liverpool Death Cafe. On Eventbrite, I call them Death and Bereavement Cafes, because a lot of people do want to talk about the bereavement side of things. And I don't want them thinking it's just a load of goths hanging out. It is a very sensitive thing. Everything that's said in the room stays in the room. And people take away what they need from it. But it's sort of done as generally it's a space of confidence.
Yeah, it's amazing. The question that we put to Kris at the end, how can we rid the UK's taboo around death? And he said things like death cafes are amazing because they get people to normalise the conversation. It's the circle of life. It happens to us all, but let's just talk about it.
Yeah, and it is just talking about it. Nearly every time I see my dad, he tells me he's got a new song for his funeral, and I'm like, are we just putting a playlist on at this point? But that's what happens when you listen to a lot of Johnny Cash. He's very suitable for a lot of funerals. So yeah, I've threatened to make a Spotify playlist for him of just everything. I was like, every time you tell me a song from now on, it's going on one list. But that's his way of doing it, and I know in his will it says he doesn't want a fuss. Same as when my mum died a few years ago. They wanted simple, cheap and cheerful, and didn't want us to waste money, but wanted us to mark the occasion. Because also with the rise of direct cremations, people aren't always getting that chance to say goodbye, and I think a funeral is really important. And then the continued conversation afterwards, which is always available at Death Cafe.
And I think that's so interesting, isn't it? Because we're all different, we're all unique, and we're all going to need different periods of time, to process that someone is dying or in the bereavement process afterwards as well. So with death cafes, do you have that luxury of, using it for as long as you need to, really?
Yeah, so the nights themselves can be as long as people want. People are welcome to come in and leave whenever they feel comfortable. But obviously I do have people that come back every 3 or 4 months. So they'll pop along when they sort of feel like they need a little top up on the normal conversation, or to say, thank you, that did actually help, or things have changed, like their situation's changed if they were anticipating a death and now sadly bereaved.
Do people sort of form social networks of support through death cafes?
I think people can, but I think a lot of the time people sort of leave it where it is. So I think it's a safe space to be open and to be vulnerable, but they sort of leave it there, rather than, at least I haven't seen people changing numbers very often.
That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
And they all have contact with me, so if they wanted to get in contact with somebody else, I've got most people's details.
That's great. Obviously, it's a men's mental health podcast, and this is one of the topics when we put it out to social media. What do you want us to cover? And this came up quite a lot, really, death and dying. But suppose that what I wanted it really is to get your opinion for the likes of death cafes. Do you see that men attend there? Is it predominantly?
It seems to be more women.
Yeah.
But I'd say not by a lot. I'd say it's probably about 60-40 to men. And I don't know if that's because, it's me creating it, so they see my name, my picture. If they'd be more comfortable if it was a man hosting it. But you do, everybody needs to talk, and everybody needs to express their opinions or their worries about dying. And that does come through with a lot of people. I've had people that have worked with death, people that have worked with human remains, but not in a funeral directory capacity. And that can be a big challenge for them, because they're like, I sit in a very strange place. So having somewhere to come and talk, and a lot of those, it was the men in the profession that I think maybe didn't feel comfortable talking at work,
right,
that then wanted to come and talk about it at Death Cafe.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because Chris was saying the same. We said, what support is offered for morticians who are around death all of the time? And he said they just used to have the crying cupboard, as he called it. He said, you know, but he did say, but as professionals, they all rallied around each other and they all sort of did it in house. Of look, you all knew, didn't you?
Peer support you just
Yeah. So there is like a lot of the funeral directors that I know. I can go in, have a cup of tea. And I just have a check-in with them. So if I'm in the area, I'll pop in and say hi. And I'm just like, is everybody okay? Yeah. Or like sometimes we know when it's a tough funeral. And there's just that little moment of when I walk out of the chapel and they're about to walk in. There's sort of both of us. Me a big breath out and them a big deep breath in. And sometimes they're just tough days.
Yeah.
But we do know that we've got each other in that capacity, which is nice.
What do you find that you know running these? What do you find the benefits are for yourself for this?
For running a death cafe, I get to talk about it in a different capacity than obviously as a celebrant. I am there for the families, so I have to bend my will to them, to what they need. So there are times when I just need to be able to sort of shake off that mask, as it were, and talk about things a little bit more freely, not in a way that would break anyone's confidence, but just in a, you know, I've done 3 this week, it's been tough, or, you know, I just had a really hard service, because it brings back emotions of people that I've lost in the past. So whether that be family members or friends, sometimes you're not expecting it, and all of a sudden, mid-service, I will get hit with something, and it's nice to know that I've never not more than 4 weeks away from a death cafe to talk about it.
Do you see people change who come to the death cafes? Maybe they come in and they're a little bit, you know, timid and anxious around it, and then
everybody looks at me like I'm absolutely crackers. So I'm sat there with my little sign and my skull. His name's Jonah, and people look at me. They're like, "So what is it?" And I'm like, "We're literally just going to talk about death and whatever comes up." And then in 20 minutes, you can be hearing like some of their deepest, darkest fears. But it's having that space available that isn't for most of the time, where they can be vulnerable and you can tell me all about your worries about your dad. I'm never going to meet your dad. Or if I am, I'm not going to know who he is. So it's a safe, sort of almost anonymised space, even though we're face to face.
Brilliant,
it's first names only. I don't ask for people's national insurance numbers or anything like that. So
it's great. I just love the concept of it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And someone like Conleth and big public health flag.
With palliative care, like, you know, with all this kind of stuff. Because I've always said, you know, basically we're living in one big hospice. You know, we're all going to die, as you know, going down that route. And it is going out there and talking about these things. You know, you share experiences, like, you know, because there was one program which actually, you know, got me a little bit there the other day. I was just watching just general stuff, easy watching on TV. And it was a BBC iPlayer program. It was called Bump. It was an Australian thing, all about this child who got pregnant at school, and it's her journey through it with her family. And I don't want to give too much away, but the penultimate episode was with the mother, the granny, do that, and how she passed away and how she wanted to share everything, talk about it, but she did it in her own way, her own terms. I disagreed with what she did, but it was lovely, and her family were there and things like that. And did I shed a little tear? Yes, I did. Like, you know, it was lovely to see it and they were all there, and it was quite spiritual as well. So I thought that was really good. But yeah, I'm a big believer in things like this, and a lot of people think, it's because of Irish background, things like how we celebrate death and maybe certain ways and things like that, whatever. I'll talk about it later, but, you know, sometimes I don't think we do it right either, like, you know.
No, sometimes it can be a bit quick.
Yeah, it is. It's like whenever my mum passed away, there was a colleague at work, and one of her parents passed away as well at the same time. And I was back at work within a week, and because I knew it was happening, I knew all this kind of stuff. We talked about it, things like that, whatever. Died, went back to Ireland. Funeral was beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. We were all, I was there whenever she passed away, but it was really nice. It was really intimate, and it was very community orientated, what we actually did. I was back to work within a week, and everything was just going on with it and things like this. And then my colleague, they didn't come back to work till about 6 weeks or something like that. And I actually said, I know it's different things with different people, but I remember saying to one time to my family, going, why is this? Like, why is she still off, whatever? And with my daughter, he said, they probably still haven't buried him yet. I went, oh, shit, yeah, I forgot all about that, and it's that prolonged things. There's, it's individual, it can be quick. If you watch that program of Chris's, there's a fella died, he said particularly 2:57 a.m. and he was buried before sunset
10:30
that day. That's how they did it. It was in Indonesia, doing that kind of thing. It's the culture. It's what they do.
I'm just impressed. I can't even get an email back that fast.
But it's that kind of thing, and it's a very. I know death cafes are worldwide, but it's also. This sounds very stereotypical of me, but a cup of tea will solve everything. Let's sit down and have a cup of tea and talk about this, and I think that's gorgeous. And to me, food is really, really important. To me, those kind of things, how you cook for people, you share for people, you do those kind of things. He's brought in Barabirth. He did Barabirth? Barabirth, sorry. Do apologise. And it was that communal thing. And I think that's really, really important as well.
Yeah, at my mum's funeral, we did the food because she said cheap and cheerful. So she'd raised 3 kids that were currently in catering, so we did the food. And all of the recipes were like my mum's favourite things to make for us. But everyone was like, what's this? So I was like, we had scones, we had, I can't think, now it's gone. Oh, we had Ophelia. And people were like, what? And I was like, yeah, it's like a Greek dish. And people were like, why did your mum make that? And I was like, she just liked it. We just had loads of different things. And they were always like loads of little vol au vents. And we were like, yeah, this is just all the food she loved cooking for us. We're cooking for you, but it's that communion,
that's it.
Eating with people. And
it was special to her, isn't it? So part of it's that reciprocal relationship, which is nice.
There's that podcast, the Kathy Burke one, Well There's a Will, There's a Way. And with that, it was actually quite interesting because her family were Irish, whatever, her father. I know her mum died at a very young age. But whenever the father was dying, he was arranging his own funeral. And he says, well, we could have it in the pub, we could do it here. And he said, and I want Marks and Spencer's food, sandwiches, the whole lot. So she went to organise, and the fella goes, I can get it from Sainsbury's to be cheaper. He goes, no, he wants Marks and Spencer's. So it can be like, oh, Marksies. It's that kind of thing. And that was really important to him. Yeah. Even though he won't be there, it was still that was really important. But that's a good podcast to listen to as well. It is important, and it is that communion of sitting with people, cup of tea, or
and the conversations that go along with it, isn't it?
And then you've got that little safety net. I think, especially with a cup of tea or coffee, when you put your hands around it, and there's safety in that I think lets people open up a little bit more.
Definitely. So if anyone's listening and they want to go to a deaf cafe, what types of steps do they need to take?
So they can find my ones on Eventbrite if you just search for Death Cafe, or they can go to deathcafe.com. And not every Death Cafe is on there, so I'd have a little Google and see if they come up elsewhere, but most are. Just not all of them get registered on their official website, but you'll find access to online ones as well as face-to-face.
Amazing. And I think that's really useful, isn't it? Accessible for people as well. Did these tend to be national as well? Are they pretty much all dotted all over the country?
Yeah, they're dotted all over the world. So the next nearest to here is often in Macclesfield. Right. Which always tickles me. You'd think it'd be Manchester, but it always seems to be Macclesfield that comes up for me. But yeah, they are all around the country, and like I said, there's online ones.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so there you go. So you can check out on deafcafe.com. Yeah, amazing. Hannah, thank you so much. I've learned so much from this, and it's been so useful as well. But thanks for being such a wonderful guest.
Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.
So follow us on Instagram at the Man Hug Podcast.
If you or anybody else you know is struggling with their mental health, Visit hubofhope.co.uk or download the app today and find local and national mental health support.